For years, Princess Anne kept her counsel, navigating the shifting tides of royal politics with quiet strength. But in the shadows of the monarchy, resentments festered, and when Queen Elizabeth passed, so did Anne's silence. What pushed the Princess Royal to abandon her stoic restraint? And why did Camilla never see it coming? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Behind palace walls, a cold war had been brewing. Anne, the steadfast daughter of Queen Elizabeth II, had long tolerated the shifting dynamics in silence. She had watched as Camilla, once seen as a scandalous outsider, steadily ascended into a place of prominence not through service or sacrifice, but through influence and timing. For Anne, this was not just about tradition, it was about loyalty. Loyalty to her mother's values, loyalty to the crown, and loyalty to the sacred order that had guided the monarchy through generations. That loyalty, she believed, had been compromised, and as the years wore on, it became harder for her to ignore the quiet undoing of what her mother had built. Though she never showed it publicly, Anne had grown increasingly disillusioned with Camilla's quiet encroachments. Public events became battlegrounds of coded gestures. Anne's sharp glances, her sudden withdrawals from joint appearances, her refusal to entertain certain proposals, all were warning signs, missed or dismissed by Camilla and her circle. Those closest to Anne whispered about how she'd confided in only a select few her trusted staff and perhaps Catherine, the Princess of Wales. The Queen's death, while tragic, also marked the loosening of the tight seal Anne had held on her discontent. Aides noted a shift in her demeanour. She was more resolved, more calculating. The restraint was gone, and something was coming. What triggered the final decision remains shrouded in mystery. Some speculate it was a conversation overheard during a late-night royal reception. Others point to an internal memo quietly circulated between royal departments, hinting at Camilla's intention to restructure ceremonial duties. But what is known is this: Anne began clearing her schedule. A specific day stood out, marked in her personal calendar simply as CC, a cryptic note, but unmistakable in its significance. That date was deliberately removed from public view, and palace insiders knew better than to ask. Anne's loyalty to her mother's legacy was never in doubt, but now it had evolved into something more forceful. She wasn't just defending tradition, she was preparing to draw a line in the sand. The monarchy, in her eyes, had been infiltrated by those who had not earned their place, and her silence had allowed it. That was no longer acceptable, and as the atmosphere within the palace grew tense, Anne moved with quiet determination. The Princess Royal had not spoken publicly, but behind closed doors a confrontation was yielding. Whispers of Clarence's confrontation spread like wildfire among senior aides, though no one could confirm its purpose. The only certainty was that Anne had reached her breaking point. Camilla, still basking in the ceremonial glow of her elevated title, was unprepared for the storm about to unfold. She underestimated Anne's resolve, but the real shock wouldn't come from the meeting itself. It would be what Anne said behind those locked doors that changed everything. It was not on the official calendar. No press, no aides, no staff. Just a sealed room in St. James's Palace and two women who had avoided direct conflict for decades. What triggered this unscheduled showdown, and who leaked details of what happened next? St. James's Palace, once a fortress of royal discretion, became the epicenter of a silent storm. The corridors were hushed that morning, with only whispers exchanged among senior staff. An urgent directive had been issued late the night before: clear the West Wing, no interruptions, all communication devices disabled. No names were spoken aloud, but the gravity was felt by everyone who walked those halls. Something significant was about to unfold, something that shattered every established rule of protocol. A confrontation had been arranged, but not by the king. And that fact alone sent tremors through the highest levels of the royal household. At exactly 10:47 a.m., Princess Anne arrived. Her stride was firm, her expression unreadable, but what stunned those few who caught a glimpse was her attire: full ceremonial military uniform. Not a casual choice. This was a declaration, a show of authority, a symbol of rank. She was not arriving as a sister or as a grieving royal, she was entering as a force of command. And precisely 7 minutes later, Queen Camilla stepped inside. Cloaked in black, her usual composed demeanour seemed hesitant. Some believe she knew what awaited her. Others claim she had no idea. But what cannot be debated is the significance of King Charles's absence. His deliberate decision to remove himself from the meeting raised countless questions. Why wasn't he there? Or more ominously, why didn't he dare be? A trusted footman later confided to an insider that the air near the chamber felt cold as stone. No raised voices, no echoes, just silence. The kind that suffocates, the kind that means something powerful is happening behind closed doors. He noted the door remained sealed for over an hour. No staff entered, no messages delivered, and yet the intensity radiated outward, like a storm building just beneath the surface. Everyone outside that room understood instinctively this was not a discussion. This was a reckoning. When the first words were finally exchanged, according to a source close to the Queen's staff, it was Camilla who broke the silence. Her voice low, calculated, perhaps even defensive. "Is this about the registry again?" she asked, a question that spoke volumes. There was history here, tension long pressed. But Anne's reply was what chilled those who later heard it. She said only, "This is about what never belonged to you." 6 words that held decades of fury, pain, and indignation. 6 words that would redefine the dynamic of 2 of the most powerful women in the royal family. This wasn't a discussion over schedules or responsibilities. This wasn't about appearances or protocol. This was about lineage, honour, and a legacy Anne believed had been manipulated by a woman who should never have worn a crown. The walls of St. James's had heard many secrets over centuries, but none as scathing, none as consequential as what echoed within that chamber on that morning. What followed wasn't just a confrontation. It was a reckoning years in the making. In one brutal sentence, Princess Anne shattered any illusion of acceptance. "You were never meant to be queen," she reportedly told Camilla. And that was just the beginning. Behind those words lay decades of betrayal, grief, and buried fury. The silence that followed Anne's opening strike was deafening. Camilla, visibly stunned, struggled to find footing in a conversation that had suddenly turned into an inquisition. But Anne had waited too long, seen too much, and remained silent for far more than was just. Now, it was all coming out sharp, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The force came from the truth buried inside each word. For Anne, Camilla didn't just disrupt the monarchy, she desecrated a legacy. Queen Elizabeth had upheld the throne through duty, not ambition, and Anne had watched with mounting disgust as Camilla climbed that ladder not by service, but by strategy. "You manipulated Charles at his weakest," Anne said, her words cutting deeper than any title could ever defend. She didn't mince accusations. According to insiders, she referenced specific periods Charles's public unravelling after Diana's death. The fragile months of uncertainty when the nation questioned the monarchy's very relevance. Anne alleged that in those moments Camilla found her opportunity, not to support, but to sway. Anne's voice broke only once, and it was when she mentioned Diana. "You were there in the background," she said, "watching her drown while preparing your coronation." The impact of those words was undeniable. Camilla looked down, reportedly clutching the edge of the table as if to steady herself, but no defense came. How could it? Then came the personal blow, so precise, so haunting, it sent waves of silence through the corridors long after. Anne gestured to Camilla's chest. "You wore Mother's brooch like it was yours," she said, not with anger but sorrow. That brooch, an iconic heirloom tied to the late Queen's unwavering sense of duty, was meant for someone who had earned the weight of tradition. Not someone who, in Anne's words, treated the crown like a costume party. Witnesses later recalled Camilla opening her mouth as if to speak, only to pause. There was not "ing" she could say. The silence was an admission in itself. Anne didn't stop there. Her final line, delivered with icy composure, shook even those listening from behind secure palace doors. "We endured for duty, you schemed for position." That sentence, insiders claim, encapsulated everything Anne felt the monarchy had lost: the dignity, the quiet suffering, the sacrifices made behind closed doors to keep the royal family upright, And now, in her eyes, all of it was being repackaged as pageantry, as spectacle, while those who truly gave everything were being written out of history. Camilla, for the first time in years, had no script, no allies in the room, no whispered reassurance, just Anne. And Anne wasn't finished, because this wasn't just about emotion, it was about action. Anne had a list, and what she planned next was nothing short of royal sabotage. There's a little-known royal document, an internal registry of senior royal roles, updated privately, guarded fiercely, and Princess A. Nenny just altered it behind closed doors. What she removed, and what she added, sent shockwaves through the monarchy. In the wake of that brutal confrontation, Princess Anne wasted no time. Her emotions had been laid bare, but now it was time for precision. Hidden from the public eye exists a master list known only to a select inner circle, the Royal Operational Registry. It doesn't make headlines, but it decides everything. Who gets precedence at state events, who holds authority in ceremonial transitions, and more crucially, who is recognized as a long-term pillar of the crown. Since Queen Elizabeth's passing, access to this registry had shifted, and through quiet maneuvering and strategic silence, Anne had positioned herself closer to its controls than anyone realized. With the old Queen gone and Charles consumed with balancing the throne and his personal loyalties, Anne stepped in, not through arrogance, but through necessity, or so she believed, without fanfare or signatures blasted ACR. OSS gold letterhead, Anne submitted edits to the registry. Subtle, almost invisible if one wasn't looking, but within the royal ecosystem, they were seismic. Camilla's family, particularly her children and grandchildren, were quietly removed from ceremonial consideration. They had never been official royals, but the optics of their inclusion had been pushed subtly forward over time. Anne cut that trajectory off at the root, and in their place, she restored names that had been shadowed, forgotten, or intentionally stalled. Lady Louise Windsor, once brushed aside as the monarchy tried to downsize, was reinstated as a rising royal patron. Her name now sat next to causes once held by Anne herself, equine programs, military honours and youth development, but that was not all. The most direct blow came when Anne moved to pre-assign her own legacy titles, ones still held unofficially, to Princess Catherine. Titles tied to discipline, resilience and decades of unwavering service. For Anne, Catherine embodied those principles more than anyone else. It was a quiet coronation, not of a queen, but of a successor in spirit. And Camilla knew what it meant. She was being written out. When the queen consort caught wind of the changes, sources claim she demanded an explanation. Her words, laced with disbelief, were simple: "You don't have the authority." To which Anne, ever composed, reportedly responded without hesitation, "I just did." That moment wasn't a statement, it was a shift in power. Anne had redrawn the lines of influence without ever raising her voice. And though the registry would never be made public, its ripple effects would be seen in every state event moving forward. Placement, protocol, recognition. Camilla may have worn the crown, but Anne had just taken back control of the map. Those in the room described the queen consort as visibly rattled, unsure of how to respond. This wasn't just defiance, it was institutional recalibration. And it was only the beginning. The queen consort left the room shaken, but what Anne did next proved she wasn't finished drawing lines in the sand. As Camilla stumbled from Anne's confrontation, another royal stepped into the light, Princess Catherine. But what shocked insiders was the revelation that Anne and Catherine had been coordinating privately for months. In the carefully choreographed world of royalty, nothing is ever as spontaneous as it seems. Every appearance is calculated, every smile measured. But beneath that polished surface, a new alliance had been quietly forming. One forged not by ambition, but by shared values and a mutual understanding of what was at stake. Catherine, long seen as the elegant figure of composure, had grown into a woman who understood the harsh weight of monarchy. And Anne, hardened by decades of sacrifice, recognized in her a kindred spirit. Their late-night meetings went unrecorded. No press, no escorts. Just two women exchanging truths behind stone walls, while the rest of the institution remained focused on pageantry. Those close to the royal circle began to notice the signs. Subtle at first. A sudden shift in Catherine's tone during public engagements. a refusal to entertain joint appearances with Camilla despite palace pressure. And then came the moment that changed everything, a royal engagement in Scotland where Catherine, wearing a brooch historically linked to Anne, received a note discreetly passed to her from T. Princess Royal's private aide. The cameras missed it, but insiders didn't. That note, many now believe, was the final endorsement. A declaration that Anne had chosen her successor not in blood, but in character. Anne had once told Catherine, "You have the spine. Now let them see it." And she did. In the weeks following the confrontation with Camilla, Catherine's public stance began to shift. She stood taller, spoke with new authority, and made decisions that no longer sought approval. When Camilla extended an invitation for a joint charitable campaign meant to ease public tensions, Catherine declined, politely, firmly, and without explanation. But everyone knew the message. The line had been drawn. Then came the mirrored outfits Anne and Catherine, attending separate events but dressed in near-identical tones of navy and emerald. The colour coordination wasn't accidental. It was a signal. A quiet, defiant show of unity meant for those who were watching closely, and many were. Camille, for all her experience navigating scrutiny, couldn't hide her discomfort. She was no longer facing a lone adversary. She was up against a coalition, one built on integrity, duty, and a determination to restore what they believed had been lost. Anne didn't need to say much. Her alignment with Catherine spoke louder than any press release ever could, and for the first time, palace insiders whispered that Camilla's position was no longer unshakable. The crown she wore might remain on her head, but the influence, the narrative, the future, those were slipping from her grasp. With Catherine standing by her side, Anne made her final move, one that would devastate Camilla's position completely. Every royal knows, legacy isn't just about bloodlines. It's about titles, lands, and patronages. And Anne just pulled a masterstroke. She revised her will, stripped Camilla's step-grandchildren of future honours, and redirected everything toward a single name, Princess Charlotte, in a palace wherein her itance speaks louder than words. Princess Anne made her boldest move, yet not through confrontation, but through paperwork, with the power to reshape the monarchy's internal future. The will had long been a sealed document, updated privately, and reviewed only by a small circle of trusted legal advisors. But behind those formalities, Anne had restructured her legacy like a seasoned tactician. Without warning, she bypassed Camilla's family entirely. No titles, no lands, no ceremonial privileges. What had once been rumoured as symbolic inclusions for Camilla's grandchildren were now erased quietly and completely. Anne knew the power of perception, and more importantly, she understood how history remembers those who receive honours not because of who they are, but because of what they represent. That's why her new beneficiaries were chosen with surgical precision. Nearly every patronage, trust, and ceremonial affiliation tied to Anne's public service was redirected toward Catherine and her children. But there was one move that caught the entire royal circle off guard. Princess Charlotte, just a child in the public's eyes, was named the symbolic successor to Anne's equestrian titles, a move that went beyond gesture. It was a formal endorsement of Charlotte's future standing, a foreshadowing, a promise. Behind closed doors, the backlash from Camilla's family was immediate and bitter. Tom Parker Bowles, who had quietly cultivated relationships with charities and heritage organizations once tied to Anne, was blindsided. Multiple honorary roles he had been expecting to inherit were quietly revoked. He had no advance notice, no explanation, just a simple letter of formal withdrawal. Insiders claim his reaction was one of quiet fury, while other members of Camilla's circle were left stunned and, more importantly, silenced. The palace remained tight-lipped, but Anne, when pressed privately by a family member, offered only one cold and unforgettable response: bloodline may change, but legacy is earned. That statement sent a shiver through every corner of the royal institution. Anne was not simply making a personal decision, she was sending a message. The monarchy, in her view, could no longer afford to reward proximity over principle. The future couldn't be inherited, it had to be claimed through service, sacrifice, and strength. To those who had hoped Camilla's reign would secure her family's permanent position within the fold, Anne's legal maneuver was a ruthless wake-up call. It reasserted an older, harder version of royalty, one where favoritism had no place, and where loyalty to the crown was more important than any personal alliance. And while Camilla may have remained queen consort in name, her influence had just suffered its most humiliating defeat. The damage was done. But as the press got wind of the confrontation, what leaked to the public was more brutal than anyone expected. It wasn't supposed to leave the palace. But within 48 hours, key phrases from Anne's confrontation began circulating in the press. The media had a field day, and Buckingham Palace was thrown into total damage control. The royal family has endured decades of scrutiny, scandal, and speculation, but nothing could have prepared them for the storm that exploded across the headlines when private words became public ammunition. Somehow, somewhere inside the palace, a sliver of that sealed confrontation was captured, a recording short, muffled, but unmistakable. Some sources claimed it was from a decorative brooch embedded with a discreet recording device. Others whispered about a rogue staffer, paid off by an international tabloid. Whatever the truth, the damage was instantaneous. The quote spread like wildfire, "You broke this family before you ever wore the crown," a line allegedly spoken by Anne, dripping with accusation, raw with pain, and impossible to ignore. That single sentence became a war cry across the internet. Every media outlet seized on it. The phrase "land" e'd on front pages, late-night television, podcasts, royal commentary panels. The palace's internal machine of crisis management went into lockdown mode. Orders were issued to pull connections with several media partners. Threats of legal action followed, but it was too late. The genie wasn't just out of the bottle, it was screaming into a microphone. Behind the scenes, King Charles was reportedly desperate, not just to contain the narrative, but to protect what little unity remained. He personally reached out to Anne, pleaded with her to release a statement denying the quote, to publicly distance herself from the leak. But Anne refused. Her silence was the loudest answer. There would be no denial, no retraction, no capitulation. The world could draw its own conclusions, and clearly it had. In a move that further fueled speculation, Camilla abruptly cancelled 3 high-profile appearances. The official explanation cited a private health matter, but insiders were clear she was in no state to face the public. Her team was in chaos, with staff issuing conflicting messages and internal meetings turning into shouting matches. In stark contrast, Princess Anne carried on with scheduled duties, offering nothing but steely composure. Catherine appeared alongside her at 2 consecutive events, their unity noted, photographed, and endlessly analysed. Then came the digital tidal wave. #Team Anne began trending globally. Thousands of posts, videos, and viral threads painted Anne as the protector of the crown's integrity and Camilla as the opportunist who had finally been exposed. Even seasoned royal commentators were stunned. For the first time, public opinion wasn't just shifting, it was erupting. Loyalty, once fractured, was consolidating behind Anne. Palace issued a vague statement urging the public not to trust unverified rumours. But no one was listening. The truth, or what the world believed to be the truth, had already taken hold. The confrontation had become a national spectacle. But behind the headlines and PR spin, a darker truth lingered. Because this wasn't just about succession, it was about survival. Camilla once dreamed of redemption, of a legacy rewritten, of being remembered as more than a scandal. But Princess Anne's confrontation cracked that illusion wide open. And now, even with the crown, Camilla faces the cold truth: she may sit on the throne, but she will never rule the hearts. Behind the gilded doors of Buckingham Palace, the air was thick with discomfort. Camilla, the woman who had weathered decades of criticism, manipulation, and image rehabilitation, found herself unraveling in silence. In the days following Anne's reckoning, insiders spoke of a private breakdown, tears behind closed doors, abrupt cancellations, and long stretches of isolation. The woman who once prided herself on outlasting public disdain now stood stripped of her most precious currency, control. She had ascended, yes, but cost had finally arrived, and it came not from the press or the people, but from within her own family. King Charles, burdened by the impossible, found himself paralyzed. His love for Camilla was real, unwavering, forged in defiance of royal tradition. But Anne's voice carried a different kind of weight. She had never asked for power. She had never sought attention. And when she finally spoke, it wasn't from bitterness, it was from truth. Charles was forced to reckon with the reality that his wife and his sister could no longer coexist under a united crown. Each represented a vision of monarchy that could not be reconciled. And the palace? It quietly chose a side. Staff who once reported to Camilla's office began drifting. Assignments were missed. Communications slowed. There were no dramatic resignations, just quiet shifts, loyalties migrating toward Anne and Catherine without a word spoken. Camilla's court, once a force of press-savvy advisors and sympathetic voices, now felt hollow. Meetings grew shorter, smiles more forced. The halls, once warm with influence, echoed with avoidance. Then, in a move as poetic as it was haunting, Anne made a quiet, symbolic gesture. Without press, without ceremony, she ordered a single portrait to be returned to the West Wing. It was Diana, not in defiance but in remembrance, a visual reminder of a chapter that had never truly closed. Staff who passed it reportedly stopped and stared, unsettled by the message it carried. It wasn't revenge, it was restoration, a rewriting of balance. And Camilla saw it. She knew exactly what it meant. Outside the palace, the public responded in kind. Petitions calling for Anne to receive a new ceremonial honour, one recognizing her years of silent duty, garnered tens of thousands of signatures in days. Headlines shifted. Commentators who had once praised Camilla's quiet transformation now questioned the foundation it was built upon. In a cruel twist of fate, she had won the crown but lost the story. Haunting irony consumed her. Everything she had fought for, all the distance travelled, had led her here. Seated on the throne, yet surrounded by shadows, Anne hadn't just confronted Camilla. She had exposed the hollowness of a triumph that had never been accepted. The people remembered, the family remembered, and now so did the institution. But just when the world thought the drama had peaked, Anne delivered one final gesture, a move so symbolic, so cutting, it left Camilla shaken to her core. All eyes were on the Commonwealth Day service. Camilla entered expecting the usual protocol. But then, in full view of the cameras, Princess Anne broke tradition, turned her back, and walked away. It was more than a snub, it was a declaration. The war inside the palace was no longer private. It was meant to be a day of unity, a symbol of endurance and strength, where the royal family reminded the world of their unshakable bond. But this year the message was shattered the moment Anne stepped, into the spotlight. As Camilla stood waiting for the traditional curtsy and acknowledgement from the Princess Royal, the cameras rolled, flashes blinked, and Anne kept walking. No bow of the head, no subtle nod. Just a clear, public act of defiance. In one stride she signalled the death of illusion. The divide was no longer whispered, it was televised. The footage spread within minutes, dissected frame by analysts, commentators and social media worldwide. What began as a silent protest erupted into a global spectacle. The media frenzy was instant and unrelenting. Lip readers analysed every twitch. Body language experts filled primetime panels. Every second of the clip was studied. Was Anne's jaw clenched? Did Camilla flinch? Even Charles's reaction became a topic of global obsession, and there it was, his pained expression, barely contained, as his sister walked past his wife without so much as a glance. A royal heartbreak caught in high definition. It wasn't just a snub, it was a fracture that could no longer be hidden behind velvet curtains and smiling portraits. But amidst the chaos, one fleeting moment stood out. As Anne strode past, head held high, Catherine turned just slightly. A glance. Brief, but telling. Approval was never spoken. It didn't need to be. It was the quiet affirmation of a shared mission. The alliance was no longer operating in the shadows. The Queen Consort may have stood at the centre of the ceremony, but Anne and Catherine owned the moment, and everyone watching knew it. From within the firm, reactions were mixed but decisive. The royal family was no longer unified. Sides had been chosen. Relationships that had once held through decades of scandal and scrutiny were now splintered beyond repair. What began as quiet resistance had become a royal revolution, not in fire or fury, but in cold, calculated moves that could not be undone. The message was clear. Anne wasn't just breaking protocol, she was rewriting it. And as the camera panned away from the royal line, as viewers across the world sat stunned, one truth remained. This wasn't just about Camilla. It was about what the monarchy had become, and who still had the courage to protect what it was meant to be. Anne had spoken with actions, not words. She had drawn the final line. In the hearts of millions, her legacy had already eclipsed the crown itself. Some queens reign in title, others reign in truth. As the monarchy faces its most emotional fracture in decades, one thing is certain: Anne's voice will never be silent again. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.